How to Master the Game of Life. Machiavelli's Playbook. You've been told to be honest, to play fair, to be yourself. But what if the world you live in is a theater, and the honest man is the one who dies at intermission? What if goodness without strength isn't virtue, but an invitation? The secret Machiavelli whispers, like a razor gently pressed against the throat of comforting illusions, is that people don't see your heart, only your shadow. He does not tell you to become a monster. He tells you something colder. Monsters often win, and you had better understand why before they stand over you, smiling. In a small village outside Florence, a man once wrote by candlelight after a day of chopping wood. His hands were raw, his clothes stained with smoke and the monotony of exile. He had been a statesman, a diplomat sent to speak with kings and killers. Then, when his city fell to a returning dynasty, he was accused of conspiracy, tied behind his back and pulled into the air strappado, and released with the bones of his shoulders screaming. He was dismissed, forgotten. He put on courtly robes each evening. He wrote to an old friend, and entered the courts of the ancients, the dead whose voices he heard through books. He called it entering the company of men of old. There he negotiated with Livy and Tacitus and Caesar. There he constructed a book that would make his name an adjective, a warning, a hymn to realism that makes saints shudder and pragmatists lean closer. He called it the Prince. People think it is a manual for tyrants. It is also a survival guide for anyone forced to navigate a world full of fragile promises and hidden knives. Its core is a dare. If you want to master the game of life, learn the game as it is played, not as you want it to be. The effectual truth, he says what actually works in practice, is the truth that matters when the stakes are survival. Ideal worlds don't pay ransoms. They don't stop armies at your gate. They don't protect your reputation when a rumor becomes a bonfire. The effectual truth is the late-night phone call, the closed door, the smile that hides a decision that will erase your name from the roster by morning. The God who rules this world is Fortuna Fortune, whose moods change like weather. She is the river that seems quiet in summer and turns into a flood that snaps bridges like twigs. You do not control her. You build levees, you angle your house at the right height, you keep a boat near the door. For Machiavelli, mastery begins not with goodness, but with preparedness, with a sharp understanding of how fragile your position always is. Vert is his word energy, courage, ingenuity, the willingness to act decisively when others freeze. It is not virtue as we use it. It is closer to the craft of living without illusions. This is not an invitation to become cruel. It is a warning that unarmed kindness is a luxury, and in the wrong season luxury becomes a liability. He writes, "A man who wants to be good in a world that is mostly not good will be ruined. Not always. Not immediately. But eventually, and at the worst possible time. That means if you want to remain good, you must borrow some coldness from reality. You must learn to see the mask on your face, and when to change it. Everything in our lives, workplaces, friendships, institutions swells with the same pressures Machiavelli saw in princes and city-states. Influence and reputation are currencies. Promise-keeping is tactical. Anger has a cost, so does silence. Victories make enemies. No decision is neutral. It's just that most of us pretend it is, so we can sleep. He would say that to master the game of life, you must stop playing the game other people assure you is being played. Judge people by their incentives, not their slogans. When you hear a plan, ask who benefits. When you meet a smiling benefactor, measure what you'll owe. When you are praised, analyze the timing. When you are attacked, learn whether the attack is a test. Power, he would tell you, looks like momentum, but it is held up by scaffolding alliances, reputation, fear, hope, money, secrets, and when one beam rots, the whole structure leans. He gives you a set of creatures to carry inside you, the lion and the fox. The lion refuses to be pushed around. The fox sees the trap before the lion's paw is caught. Courage without cunning is suicidal. Cunning without courage is sterile. The trick is not to choose, but to blend, to know when to roar and when to vanish into the hedge. And understand this: most people judge you by appearances, not by results they will never see. So appearances are not superficial. They are a battlefield. You don't cheat by managing them. You refuse to be easy prey. His advice often feels deviant because it violates the script we recite to children. But watch those who rise. Count how often they get away with breaking the script because they break it with elegance, because they understood timing and optics, because they hid a knife inside a bouquet. Then notice how many good people were buried with their dignity, applauded only by other ghosts. The irony is that Machiavelli loved the freedom of a republic. He did not wish for cages. He wanted citizens strong enough to resist tyranny, and he learned that strength is not the same as niceness. He believes liberty must be defended by those who can be, when necessary, not entirely good. He believed that a free people who refuse to think like this are a spectacle preparing for its own demise. So we begin with a promise that is also a threat. You cannot control fortune, but you can build yourself into the kind of person who disrupts her moods. You can construct your levies, habits, alliances, self-mastery, a cultivated reputation that shields you even when you must be strict, and a private courage you keep quiet until it must be heard. And you will pay for every advantage you hold. There is no clean win. There is only a decision to be awake. If this is unsettling, good. Being unsettled is a step toward perception. What follows is not a catalog of tricks from a cynical uncle. It is an invitation to see the world through eyes trained in council chambers and prisons, where polite fictions are laughter for the naive. Consider this the manual you are not meant to read out loud, but cannot afford to ignore. Consider the stage and the lights on your face. Consider the shadow you cast. There is a story from the Romagna, a region of hills and dust. Cesare Borgia, son of a pope, inherits ambition like a family heirloom, polished with oil and blunt force. He wants a state that obeys him. The region is fractious, allergic to authority, full of petty lords and thugs. He hires a man, Ramiro de Orco, a name that sounds like iron. Ramiro is told to pacify. He does it with speed and cruelty. He breaks power networks like bones. The people hate him. They fear him enough to be quiet. Then one morning the townsfolk find a body in the square. It is Ramiro's, cut in half, displayed with a knife beside it. Above the carnage is a message without words. The Duke is merciful. The cruelty was the minister's, and he, your prince, has punished it. The same hand that sent Ramiro now tears him apart, and the same crowd that trembled now sighs with relief. Machiavelli was there. He watched it happen, wrote about it like someone taking notes during an eclipse. He understood what he was looking at, a piece of theater designed to compress fear into admiration, to transfer blame and consolidate love without softening control. It was horrifying. It was effective. We recoil, but pause and ask how many times you've seen a version of this play. A company announces a brutal reorganization, layoffs like a winter wind. A month later, the executive who led it is terminated in a public gesture. The brand announces recommitment to community and care. The crowd is reminded that leadership listens. The machine remains intact, more efficient. Machiavelli would call this cruelty well used, taken all at once, not dripped over time like poison that keeps a wound inflamed. If you must do harm, do it swiftly, he says. Do not multiply pains. Then, once the bleeding is done, be generous in small, visible ways that cost little and generate loyalty. Your ethics may protest. He would answer, the alternative is often endless damage, 1,000 cuts that produce complicated hatred. He sketches enemies, nobles, and people as forces, not characters. Nobles want to dominate. People want not to be dominated. If you build your power on nobles alone, you become hostage to those whose ambitions mirror your own. If you ground yourself in the people, you have more stability, because ordinary people ask for less. Safety, predictable laws, a sense that they won't be humiliated. It is a cruel calculus, but Machiavelli speaks like a doctor. Diagnose the disease before you prescribe the virtue. He is obsessed with conspiracies. He lists their failures. They require too many people to keep a secret. They need perfect timing. They fall apart under fear. They demand courage at the exact instant when it is hardest to find. And the moment you strike, you must kill not only the body, but the expectations and revenge that keep a regime alive. Many conspiracies fail, not in planning, but in the seconds when a hand shakes. He explains this to princes watch for isolated men with grievances and to ordinary citizens. Don't be the student who thinks a clever plot will defeat an institution built to absorb shocks. If you must act, prepare with extreme patience and strike at foundations, not decorations. But he prefers institutions that lower the need for conspiracies, legal channels, citizen participation, pressure valves for anger, because he knows that where speech is strangled, daggers breed. He talks about promises. Keep them, he suggests, when it helps you. And when it doesn't, be prepared to explain why circumstances changed. People forgive change when you offer a compelling story. Appearances preserve substance, he tells you, and substance without appearances is hardly seen. This is not an argument for lying as a way of life. It is an argument for understanding that trust is made of stories as much as actions. And if you refuse to manage your story, someone else will write it for you, and it will end with you as the villain of other people's survival. Fear or love? The famous question. Better to be loved and feared, he says. But if you must choose, choose fear provided you avoid hatred. Hatred is the acid that dissolves your supports. Don't touch what people hold sacred: property, honor, family, unless necessity commands, and you can explain it as protection of the common good. Be firm in enforcement, but make the harshness predictable, like gravity. People resent the arbitrary, the whimsical cruelty that makes them feel small. In your life, this translates to something less theatrical. Set clear boundaries. Enforce them consistently. Don't humiliate people when you correct them. And if you must end relationships, do it once, cleanly, with a reason that others can hear without seeing themselves in the executioner's shadow. He hates mercenaries, not only the soldiers you hire who flee when danger arrives, but any dependency on those whose loyalty belongs to money alone. Build your own capacity. Rely on your own talent and the shared interests of those bound to you. Outsourcing your core leaves you admirable and dead. In modern terms, don't stake your future on rented platforms, borrowed audiences, or one fragile sponsor. Build a base. It is slower. It survives storms. The suspense in Machiavelli does not come from surprise twists. It comes from the feeling that every move interacts with human nature's gravity. He knows envy is a force. He knows that the first success is always easier than the second, because the first is helped by hope, and the second is opposed by the frightened. He knows that reforms create enemies who lose by them, and lukewarm defenders who gain quietly. So when you decide to change your life, expect resistance from those who benefited from your passivity and indifference from those who will benefit from your strength. Prepare for this emotionally, or you will interpret it as a judgment on your worth instead of a predictable reaction to incentives. And he knows humiliation is the most dangerous toxin in politics and private life. People will forgive harm more readily than humiliation. Harm can be rationalized. Humiliation eats identity. If you are wise, build others in ways that let them keep their face. If you are at risk, understand who's been humiliated around you and how they might seek to turn the stage lights back on themselves with a violent gesture. When you have power, fear your own cruelty, not because heaven will punish you, but because humiliated survivors haunt the future. In this theater, You are both actor and stagehand. As you begin to see how illusions are engineered, you also see how easily you might be engineered. Here lies the tension that Machiavelli never fully resolves, but refuses to deny. You must play to appearances without becoming hollow. You must risk being feared without drifting into love's absence. You must be a fox among traps without turning your soul into a burrow of excuses. The game tightens. The stakes rise. And somewhere, the river swells against its banks. Now the pivot. The man who wrote The Prince also wrote about republics with something like tenderness. He revered Rome's tangled genius. He believed liberty is not a candle protected by glass, but a fire kept alive by conflict, carefully channeled. In his discourses, he says that the tumults between the Roman people and the nobles, far from destroying the republic, made it bigger and more stable by producing laws that checked the ambitions of both sides. He thought friction was not a failure of civic life, but its engine. Remove it, and you don't get peace. You get stagnation, and from that, a tyranny pretending to be order. This is the deeper revelation. Machiavelli's playbook isn't just personal cunning, it's architecture. He wants you to become someone whose private conduct and public arrangements keep fortune's tempers manageable. So he tells founders of states, of companies, of movements, to build institutions that reward excellence and punish predation without relying on angelic behavior. He assumes human beings will sometimes be vain, greedy, frightened, and brave. Good design anticipates these tides. Vert energy, foresight, aggressive creativity is not only for princes, it's for citizens. It's the grit that makes you act when comfort advises delay. He does not demand that you be reckless. He urges audacity when opportunity appears, because fortune favors the bold, not by magic, but because boldness moves before doubts organize. He uses a shocking image for his time. Fortune is like a woman who must be beaten and coerced to be submissive. The metaphor is brutal, a mirror of his age's misogyny, and we reject it. But keep the structural point while discarding the violence. Fortune is partial to those who advance confidently and refuse to wait for perfect conditions. In modern, humane language, courage under uncertainty is an advantage. He offers two images for preparing: a river and a battlefield. The river, we saw, floods. The wise build banks in good weather, not when the waters already rage. Translating to life, the time to diversify your skills, save money, cultivate allies, and craft a public reputation is when you don't yet need them. The battlefield, you choose ground that suits your weapons, not the ground your enemy prefers. Don't fight where your weaknesses are exposed. Don't negotiate in forums where your voice is drowned. Gather information, arrive first. Force others to play on your map. This leads to a principle that reframes morality. Effectiveness is a precondition for goodness. If you are not effective, your virtue can't scale. If you are effective without principles, your success corrodes the world. The balance is not accidental. It is cultivated as deliberately as a city's walls. To build it, Machiavelli recommends habits that in our time would be called systems thinking. Separate your public and private selves, not to be two-faced, but to understand that the mask is a tool. What you display can protect what you are. Keep counsel with a few who will tell you the truth. He warns against flatterers. They destroy regimes from the inside by closing the feedback loop. Create rituals that align your team's energy parades, meetings, vivid language. He saw religion used this way in Rome. Not for heaven, but for civic order. Today it might be your team's story, your mission narrative. This is not manipulation if the story is true enough to inspire courage and constraint. It becomes poison when it turns into an excuse for cruelty or delusion. He also insists on arms, and in his day, it meant citizens bearing weapons, not hired guns. Translated, build native capacity. Teach your people, your children, your colleagues, your community how to do the hard parts themselves. This isn't just a defense strategy. It creates dignity. People who defend their world care about it. People who rent every function become clients of those they do not control. You can hear in his voice the suspicion that prosperity breeds softness. Corruption, in Machiavelli's vocabulary, doesn't only mean bribes. It means a culture that prefers comfort to greatness, that avoids necessary conflict, that lets flattery replace feedback. Once corruption sets in, he says, a people must return to first principles or accept decline. This return is often painful. It requires founders' energy, laws that punish the powerful when they trespass, and citizens willing to take the hard path for a while. He does not promise that such a return always succeeds. He says it is the only route that sometimes does. So how do you apply a Republican Machiavelli to mastering life? Design your environment so that your better impulses win. Remove temptations where possible, rather than betting on willpower. Turn your values into visible practices. If you want truth, reward dissent. If you want courage, tell stories of it. If you want fairness, make processes transparent. Don't depend on your mood to do the right thing. Tie yourself to the mast before the song of convenience begins. And when crisis comes, act decisively. The worst decision is often to delay in hope that reality will grow gentle. It won't. We deepen the angle. Machiavelli is often accused of divorcing politics from morality. In reality, he divorces politics from moral theater. He thinks the highest moralism in a leader is to deliver security and freedom, not to sound holy while presiding over weakness. He also thinks most of us are more theatrical than we admit. Our morals are stage sets we build for ourselves, sometimes strong enough to hold weight, sometimes collapsible. He wants you to build sets that hold when real lives step on them. The more you read him, the less you see a devil, and the more you see an ironist. He knows people are contradictory. He knows that one day you will need to forgive someone who hurt you for reasons that were almost rational and almost cowardly. He knows you will need forgiveness too. But he refuses to let this become a cloud of pretty feelings that distract from the question. What works to preserve a free, decent life where most people can pursue their particular goods without terror? That question is larger than any prince. It is the quiet heart of citizenship. And so the playbook opens into something wider than tactics. It says, become dangerous in the right way. Not because danger is glamorous, but because without it your kindness is a snack. Cultivate a reputation that buys you time when you make hard choices. Build allies based not only on mutual advantage, but on shared practices that stand outside both of you. Accept that people will misread you. Speak clearly anyway. Treat your image like a wall. Repair it as needed, don't worship it. Finally, hold to a line your line, the one boundary you will not cross, even if the river rises. Because the river will rise, and you will need something immovable to tie the rope around when you pull others to safety. Behind every maxim in Machiavelli is a human cost. He knew it, felt it in his own body. Imagine him after torture, shoulders aching with a pull that returns in the rain. He goes home to a fair mouse and writes to a friend. He describes the day. Arguments with the miller, a game of cards at the inn, the stupid jokes of men who have surrendered to smallness. Then at night, he changes clothes, washes the dust, and enters a room of kings who died 2,000 years ago. He speaks with them. He asks questions and is interrogated in return. He is poor, but in those hours, he is more than himself. Out of that poverty, he creates a book meant to buy him a job. That book makes him immortal and does not get him hired. There is a tenderness in that irony, and there is bitterness too. He writes the prince to impress a Medici. The Medici do not care. He writes the discourses for educated friends to argue with. For decades, the world reads him as a devil. He is a man who understood the dangers of reputation. He could not control his own. That is the hardest lesson of all. You can manage appearances, but the world is a hall of mirrors with its own distortions. Control is never total. Fortune will, at times, laugh at your preparations. The emotional gravity here is not despair. It is the solemn knowledge that every choice invites a shadow. Be feared rather than loved? Then you will sleep with the knowledge of the fear you caused. Be loved rather than feared? Then you awake to discover you taught others that you can be neglected. Strike your enemies decisively? Then you inherit their ghosts. Be merciful? Then you may permit a threat that returns to choke you later. There is no way to live that does not involve a tragedy you chose, and others you did not. The playbook does not remove this weight. It offers a way to carry it without lying to yourself. Machiavelli's villains are vivid. His heroes are strange. Cesare Borgia glows for a moment like a star audacity, intelligence, a masterclass in decisive action, then dies in a ditch of fortune's laughter. The Medici bloom and rot and bloom again, with money and marriages. The Republic shudders through factions and occasional grandeur. Meanwhile, the people, bakers, clerks, farmers want continuity. They want to live without fear of a knock at night. Machiavelli looks at them and sees the point of politics. Biographies of princes are tools. The human purpose is larger. And yet the model he offers comes with coldness that hurts. Live as a fox and a lion, and you may lose the softness that lets you trust the sun to rise without your calculation. You may become suspicious by habit, armored in a way that lovers cannot breach. You may rationalize harm as necessity and discover too late that you liked being necessary more than being good. The risk in Machiavelli is not just becoming ruthless. It is becoming clever at the expense of being reachable. A life can be perfectly defended and empty. He knows this. You hear him wrestling when he says that a prince should avoid hatred. Hatred is not just dangerous politically. It corrodes the soul of the hater. He urges you to avoid humiliating others because humiliation returns like winter, but also because it stains you. It turns you into a stage manager of other people's shame. He says to make cruelties rare and necessary because he feels the gravity of inflicting pain. He is not a sadist. He is a man who believes reality does not soften for our preferences, and therefore we must use severity like a surgeon uses a knife reluctantly, expertly, quick. There is also hope that peeks through, not sentimental but sturdy. He believes people can be better than their comforts if given the right incentives and rituals. He believes ordinary citizens can govern if trained to expect responsibility. He believes that conflict, managed well, is not a doom but a discipline. He laughs too, in letters and in stories, because humor is a way of breathing in air without pretending it smells like roses. That humor is a sign he has not been conquered by bitterness. He admires greatness, but not pomp. If you listen, you hear a love for clarity, for a world where words map to the terrain they claim to describe. And what of you? You may not command soldiers, but you command your hours, your attention, your circles of obligation. If you pursue excellence, envy will arrive dressed like advice. If you keep your word, someone will test how rigid a virtue can be. If you are gentle, you will be taken for weak until the day you are not, and that day will surprise everyone, including you. The emotional price of mastery is not the absence of feeling. It is discipline without self-deception. When you grieve, grieve. When you forgive, forgive with eyes open to habits that won't change. When you refuse, refuse so cleanly that even those who dislike it understand it. There is an intimate scene that returns when thinking of Machiavelli. In 1525, 2 years before his death, he writes a dream in which he meets a crowd of shabby, miserable souls going to hell, and separately, a company of ancient philosophers and heroes discussing politics with dignity on their way to another destination. He says he would rather go to the place where people talk about politics. He can't help himself. Conversation with the dead felt like home. It's almost sweet, almost sad, the man who wanted a job back in the city imagining a salon in the underworld. Behind the iron of his advice is this thirst: to live among minds, to be useful to the living, to be honest in a world that rewards pretense, but still to fight for a space where decency can breathe. If, after all the maxims and metaphors, you feel a kind of ache, you are hearing the real music. Mastery is not triumph over others. It is a posture in the storm. It is knowing that every strategy becomes a story in the mouths of those you touched, and that someday you, too, will be a name used by others to sharpen their arguments. Live in a way that when they speak your name, even your enemies acknowledge you did not lie to yourself, and you did not force them to lie about you. That is a victory fortune cannot easily smudge. So where does this leave you, standing at the edge of a river that might rise tonight? The Machiavellian playbook, stripped of costume, gives you a series of vows that sound less like slogans and more like discipline. You will see people as they are, not as you wish them to be, and love them anyway with rules. You will study incentives like a cartographer studies coastlines, because you know that storms blow hardest around hidden coves. You will build capacity so that you do not need mercenaries, skills, savings, allies, redundancies, because you refuse to make your future a hostage. You will manage appearances without becoming a mask, because you understand that reputation is a shield you must carry, but the arm beneath it must be strong enough to lift more than your own comfort. You will time your actions speed in crisis, patience in construction. You will act in concentrated doses rather than a slow bleed. You will be feared by the right people for the right reasons and loved where love is nourishment rather than flattery. You will avoid hatred like a cliff's edge. You will not humiliate. You will not make a habit of cruelty. When necessity demands severity, you will be quick, and then you will stop. You will design your life like a republic. You will create checks on your own worst impulses. You will invite dissent from trusted voices who owe you truth more than favors. You will return to first principles when comfort has made you soft. Why you began, what you defend, who you refuse to become. You will keep your word when it matters, and admit when circumstances have changed, offering a story that is honest enough to stand. You will learn to speak in a language that people can hear, not because you crave applause, but because you crave outcomes. And you will hold a private line, the unbreakable refusal, the act you will not commit, not even if fortune kneels, not even if an enemy bows his head to your knife. Mastery without that line is just technique. With it, mastery becomes character. A question lingers like a quiet drumbeat. What would you do if opportunity arrived wearing the clothes of compromise? Would you recognize fortune when she came? Would you dare to take her hand without losing your grip on yourself? The answer cannot be rehearsed. It is made in the moment by the person you have been building in the dark. Machiavelli does not close the curtain with reassurance. He leaves you with tools, a map of human weather, and a few warnings scratched into the margins. Beware flattery. Beware humiliation, giving it and receiving it. Beware borrowed power posing as your own. Beware waiting for perfect conditions when the flood is already seeping under the door. He also leaves you with a kind of courage, the knowledge that the game is not fair and that you can still play beautifully, that you can admire the fox without becoming a weasel, the lion without becoming a bully, that you can use power to make and not only to break, that you can exit a room with your head unbowed even if your plan failed because you refuse to lie about the terrain, that, in your turn, you will be misunderstood, maybe reviled, and that this is the price of not taking shelter in pretty fictions. Stand, then, on your chosen ground. Mix patience and audacity. Read your time clearly. Forgive slowly. Punish rarer than your anger wants. Reward more than your pride thinks necessary. Invite strong allies and tolerate useful enemies who keep you sharp. Protect the space where honest speech survives. Let your kindness be guarded by competence. Let your ambition be leashed by conscience. Let your strategies serve a civilization larger than your ego. Tonight, when the house is quiet, imagine sitting in that small Tuscan room. Change your clothes not because you must, but because ritual primes the mind. Open a book. Enter the company of the living and the dead who tell the truth as they saw it. Ask them questions with your life. The door is always there. The ancients are never tired. Fortune is already rattling the windows. The levees you build in the calm will hold, or they will not. But either way, you will face the flood awake. If this opened your eyes, subscribe to Boring History, because the truth is never boring.